No doubt inspired by the recent success of my boyfriend Dave in his recent attempts, I've had a few people ask me for tips on how to get started crocheting themselves. So in today's video we are covering everything a beginner needs to know to get you crocheting up a storm. There is a lot to cover in this video, everything you see here, not necessarily in that order, so we better just get started. If you are new here, hello! My name is Michelle and I'm a proud multi-crafter who loves to make all of the things and encourage you to do the same. I've been crocheting since 2013. I taught myself primarily from YouTube and blogs, and within a month of starting I'd already had my first design picked up by an actual magazine. So my approach to learning this might be a bit more detailed and theoretical than you would see in other beginner tutorials, but trust me, it totally works. Remember that learning any new skill takes time and practice. That is just how it's always going to be. Learning to crochet is difficult and a lot of stuff in this video is going to be confusing at first. I've tried to show examples as clearly as possible, but it is going to require pausing the video or even taking a break, practicing and coming back to it later for you to get all of this down. Totally normal, that's totally fine, go at your own pace. If you're coming to this from another craft such as knitting, you might be surprised to learn that the rules in crochet are a little bit more like guidelines. I've tried my best in this video to show you kind of the default way of doing things, but if you stumble across a method that works better for you or you just think looks better, that is totally valid. Go with it. Alright, enough disclaimers, let's go. First things first, if you don't already have some crochet supplies, this is what you are going to need. A 5mm crochet hook. These can be bought individually, but I recommend buying a cheap set of aluminium hooks from Amazon or similar, since they'll include a range of sizes that you might need for other projects in the near future. Some stitch markers. These cheap plastic ones can be bought basically everywhere in big boxes like this, or you can get them in smaller packs. You'll only need a couple, but don't skip these. Trust me, I will explain later in the video. Scissors. A tapestry needle for finishing off your work. And of course, yarn. There are 3 things to take into account when you pick your yarn: material, weight, and colour. In terms of material, acrylic yarn like this is cheap, it's versatile and forgiving for newbies. It's great for projects like accessories or blankets, but bear in mind it is plastic, so it's not absorbent and it will melt in very high temperatures. For this reason, if you're planning to start out making washcloths, pot holders, or anything else that needs to handle water, heat, or both, you'll want to choose cotton yarn instead. The most common weight of yarn is known as worsted, Aran, 10-ply, or size 4 depending where in the world you are, and it's a great starting point that is neither too fiddly nor too bulky. If in doubt, you can check the recommended hook or needle size on the ball band. If it's around 4.5 to 5.5mm, that's the stuff. As a beginner, you want to choose yarn in a light colour. I would recommend against pure brilliant white, but any light neutrals or pastels will make your life a lot easier. Even if you are goth through and through, you really want to start on a lighter yarn. Seriously. Now, before we get stuck into making stitches, I just want to share a little bit of theory. Trust me, this will be helpful. First up, a note on US versus UK terminology. Yes, there are 2 names for every stitch. I know. But don't panic because it is actually very simple. First of all, most patterns will be very explicit about which terminology they're using. You'll find that US is vastly more common, but it is always worth a double check. If a pattern doesn't specify, look out for whether it uses single crochet. Single crochet stitch doesn't exist in UK terms, so if you see that, you know the pattern is written in US. What the US style refers to as a single crochet stitch is known as a double crochet in UK terms. And what US style knows as a double crochet stitch is known as a triple or treble crochet in UK. I'm sure you see the pattern there. Basically the UK stitch names are kind of one higher than the US equivalent. That's it. Simple enough, but it can trip up newbies with occasionally hilarious results, so just something to be aware of there. For the avoidance of doubt, I will be using US terminology through the rest of this video because it is by far the one you will see most often. One of the other main problems I see beginners coming across is that they can't identify their stitches, which makes all kinds of other things more difficult. So let's learn to do that first. Here I've prepared 2 swatches. On the left we have a swatch of single crochet stitches and on the right a swatch of double crochet stitches. These were created in rows, alternating direction like so, and if that makes no sense, don't worry, it will soon. Each stitch consists of two parts, a post highlighted in blue and a V highlighted in red. As you can see, the height of the post is the main difference between the single and double crochet. From this angle, the V looks nothing of the sort, but if we turn the swatch around and look at the top of the last row of stitches, you can now see clearly that the top of the stitch is V-shaped. The leg of the V that's closest to you is the front loop, and the one furthest away is, you guessed it, the back loop. But why on earth do you need to know this, right? Well, first of all, by default when a pattern asks you to work into a stitch with no other specific instructions, it is referring to putting your hook under the V from front to back. Note how the hook goes under both legs of that V. Sometimes you might see other instructions like back loop only, front loop only, or even working around the post. Those are more advanced topics, but simply knowing how to identify each part of the stitch will help you avoid a few common beginner mistakes. Alright, now you know what some stitches look like and how to identify them, you are already miles ahead of most other absolute beginners. I guess it's time to move on to actually making stitches. Making a slip knot. There are other more advanced ways to start a project, but let's start with the most common, the slip knot. There are a few methods knocking around for making these, but I'll show you the one that I found easiest as a beginner. Hold up these two fingers of your left hand like so, and wrap your working yarn around them twice like this. Note that there are two loops over my fingers, and the end of the yarn is dangling down in front. Lift the leftmost loop up and over the other and off that first finger, and then lift the second loop over and off both fingers. Give that dangling tail a bit of a pull and there you go, you have a knot. Now all you need to do is insert your hook in place of your finger and give it a bit of a tighten. No need to make this super tight, but just make sure it's secure around the hook, and there you go. One skill down, only about 1,000 more to go, right? Making a chain stitch. Again, there are other ways to start a project, but this is the most common. To make a chain stitch, take your hook in your right hand and the working yarn in your left. If you are left-handed, obviously feel free to mirror all of my instructions, but a lot of lefties prefer to crochet the right-handed way to make following tutorials easier, so that's completely up to you. I like to wrap the yarn twice around my index finger, but you may find another method works much better for you. Here's a slow-mo if you want to try the same method as me. The level of control you have over the working yarn is going to drastically affect the evenness and neatness of your work, but don't worry if this is super tough at first. It is for everyone, and the only way is to push through and practice until it becomes second nature. This is 100% the most difficult thing about learning to crochet, but we all started out feeling like we needed an extra pair of hands, and you can do it, I promise. Okay, so we have control, or in your case, some semblance of control over the working yarn here. Take your hook and pass it under your working yarn to the back. I'll do that again. We're passing the hook down and underneath the yarn like so. This is known as a yarn over because the yarn is now over our hook. Alternatively, some people prefer to keep the hook still and just use their left hand to pull the yarn over. Again, there's a lot of room for personal preference here, and most people end up somewhere in the middle doing a bit of both. And now the bit you've all been waiting for. We're going to use the hook to pull this yarn over through this loop that is already on the hook. So watch carefully what I'm doing here and I'll try to break it down. I'm holding on to the work with the thumb and middle finger of my left hand and pulling it down away from the hook very, very lightly. I'm not trying to stretch out the yarn or pull really tight, but I'm just opening up a clear route through that loop. Now as I pull the hook back through, the hook end is facing down. This makes it so much easier to pull cleanly through the loop on our hook without it snagging. Let's see that again. Pinching the work, pulling down away from the hook, hook end facing down, yarn over, and pull through. Nice and clean. Don't try and pull it too fast your first few times. If you do feel your hook snag on something, just relax, take a deep breath, loosen up and try again. You'll also likely be tempted to pull really tight on the working yarn, but that just makes it more difficult to pull through the loop on your hook. You want to have control but not be pulling too tight. Yeah, I know it feels really weird, but the last thing you want is a tight chain. Essential beginner tip number 1. Always use a stitch marker on the first stitch of every row. So, after completing your first chain stitch, you should be able to identify the V. Take a stitch marker and fasten it around both legs of that V that you just made. If you don't have a proper stitch marker, you can use a bobby pin, a bit of random string, or just whatever you have lying around that will stay on and won't get in the way too much. But this will be crucial later on. Practice chaining as much as you want until you feel comfortable, because the skills you just learned are pretty much all the crochet skills you need. You know how to yarn over, you know how to keep your tension loose, and you know how to pull through a loop cleanly. Every other stitch we're going to do today is a combo of those things, so congrats, you are officially one of us. Single crochet. Okay, so once you're feeling good about your chain stitches, let's turn them into something spectacular. Here I have a chain of 27 stitches, and we're going to work our first row of single crochet stitches into this chain. The exact number really doesn't matter since this is just practice, but 27 is my favourite number. We already looked at the anatomy of stitches and where you'll insert your hook to work into a regular row, but working into the chain is a bit different. And this is where I would like to introduce you to essential beginner tip number 2. Chaining and working your first row into that starting chain is by far the most finicky part of most projects. Once you get past that first row, everything else is going to be so much easier. So please don't let this part put you off. You got this. If you recall from looking at the stitch anatomy, we identified the V as the default place to put your hook. Well, chain stitches also have a V, although as a beginner yours might be a bit harder to find. As you can see here, on one side of my chain is a clear series of V shapes, while if we turn over to the back, we see a series of bars or bumps. Your chain might be a bit all over the place. Do not beat yourself up about it, we all started in the exact same place. If it's too loose or twisted to make sense of, just try again. These things take time to learn, go at your own pace, this is a judgment-free zone. So yes, we'll stick to working into the V's for now, however it tends to be easiest to just work into this back leg of the V on your chain. So in the interests of keeping this doable for you, we'll start there. First, identify the second chain stitch from your hook. So here, just behind my hook, we can see the first V. Skip that, we'll be working into this second V instead, and specifically into the back leg. Insert your hook, and now yarn over just like we did for the chain stitch. You'll notice that the big difference here is that when we made the chain stitch there was only one loop on the hook, and here we have 2. But don't panic because you only need to pull this yarn over through the first one. Remember, hook end pointing down, tug very lightly to open the loop if you find that helpful, and there we go. Alright, so we still have 2 loops on the hook, yarn over once more, and this time you'll pull through both of the remaining loops to complete your single crochet. If you can pull through one, you can pull through 2, exactly the same principles. And there you have it, your first single crochet. Now, before we do anything else, stitch marker. Find the V of the stitch you just made. It will be just to the right of your hook. You can see mine here. And insert the stitch marker underneath both legs of that stitch. Harder than it looks on camera. I will explain the purpose of the markers soon, but for now, just trust me. So let's do that again. If you pull up slightly on the hook, you can see which of the chain V's that stitch was made into. So we're going to be working into the next one. Insert the hook from front to back, yarn over, pull through one loop, now yarn over again, and pull through both loops. Continue working into each stitch until you get to the end of the row. Once you've been doing this a while, it's second nature, but as a beginner you might find you lose track of which step you've just done. If there are 2 loops on your hook, but the hook end is at the back of your work, you're at the first yarn over, pull through 1. If you have 2 loops on your hook, but the hook end is at the front of your work, you're at the second yarn over and pull through 2. You'll get a feel for it in no time, and in the meantime, if you're truly lost and you can't figure out where you are, no biggie. Essential beginner tip number 3. If in doubt, just take everything off the hook except for that rightmost loop. Give the working yarn a tug and you are back to the start of your stitch and ready to try again. Just a note here on ending your row. Remember that stitch marker we put into the very first chain stitch? That's your signal so you know where the last stitch in this row should go. Work your way along until you reach the V with the stitch marker. Remove the marker. Insert your hook. And complete your single crochet stitch as normal. Ta-da! You are way less likely to have mucked up your stitch count, and you're way more likely to end up with an actual straight edge as we build this up. Which brings us to essential beginner tip number 4. Count your stitches after every single row, especially when you're first starting out. It's a little tedious, but it's going to help you avoid so many mistakes before they spiral or, let's be honest, slant dramatically out of control. Eventually you will of course learn to identify the last stitch in a row by sight, but they can be really misleading, so avoid my stitch marker tip at your peril. Once a row is complete, you'll be turning your work, which is literally what it sounds like. In crochet, you are basically always stitching from right to left. So once we reach the end, we need to flip our work over so we can work from right to left for the next row. To start a second row of single crochet, you will first want to chain 1. So remember, yarn over, pull through the loop on the hook. That is your chain. Now you'll be working into the V of the last single crochet you made, not the V of this chain you just made. From now on, you'll be inserting the hook under both legs of each V from the previous row, and just repeating the steps for a single crochet. Hook in, yarn over, pull through 1. In this case, we are treating the entire V as 1, so pull through 1. Yarn over, pull through 2. Don't forget the stitch marker. Next stitch, identify that V, make sure you are passing the hook underneath both legs, like so, and just carry on like that. Work all the way across, you have a marker telling you which is the last V you should be working into, and just like that, you're doing it. Okay, so you can practice single crochet as much as you want. I always recommend trying a square because it helps you develop muscle memory, learn about keeping your stitch count correct, and just generally get into the swing of things. Essential beginner tip number 5. If you've practiced a bit and you feel like your tension just isn't getting any better, or if you're having any kind of wrist or hand pain, consider a tension ring. I've not used one of these personally, so I can't really vouch for it, but I do know a lot of people who swear by them, so it might be worth a try. Whatever makes life easier, and remember, judgment-free zone. Now we're going to move onwards and upwards and look at some other stitches. Double crochet. In double crochet, the steps are similar but different. When we started a new row of single crochet, we chained one, then worked into the first proper stitch. With double crochet, we'll be chaining 3 and working into the second proper stitch. 1, 2, 3. You can see here that chaining 3 has created something similar to the post of a double crochet, and this chain 3 does in fact count as our first double crochet. Now, important note, this can vary from pattern to pattern, so read carefully to see if your turning chain does count as a stitch, but by default this is usually the case with double crochet. Because this counts as our first stitch, it's also where we want to do our last stitch on the next row, so let's get a stitch marker in there to remind us before we do anything else. Okay, in this next part my fingers actually got in the way a bit of what I was trying to show you, so I'm just going to voice over this illustrative image instead. The chain 3 that we've made counts as a double crochet. So that means the V at the base of that chain has already got a stitch in it, our fake double crochet. Therefore, the next stitch we'll work into is the next V along from that. Now, to start your double crochet, do a yarn over before you insert the hook. Then just insert under both legs of that V as usual. Yarn over and pull through 1, which should leave 3 loops on your hook. You're going to yarn over and pull through 2 loops twice. Yarn over, pull through the first 2 loops, yarn over, pull through the second 2 loops. And that's it. That is a double crochet. Let's see it again. So yarn over, insert the hook, yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2, yarn over, pull through 2. You might notice that the middle steps are exactly the same as with single crochet, the difference being that that initial yarn over is giving us an extra loop to deal with, so we need to do that final step twice. See what I mean about all the stitches being very similar? Let's finish up double crochet and I'll give you some tips on memorising all of this in a bit. Alright, I've placed my last double crochet into the V that held the stitch marker. As usual, going to turn my work, chain 3, add that stitch marker into the top of the chain I just made, yarn over and work into that second stitch. Remember, the chain 3 is counting as our first double crochet. Just a quick tip, when you come to the end of your second row, you'll have your stitch marker in the top of this chain, which remember counts as a stitch. Because it's a chain, it doesn't have such an easy V to insert your hook into, so to make life easier, you can just put your hook under the chain like this, and complete your last stitch as normal. You might find that it looks a little bit baggy at the side. Don't worry, that's kind of normal with this style of turning chain, and ways of dealing with that are a more advanced topic. Triple or treble crochet. You're going to start spotting a pattern here, I think. To start a row of triple crochet, we will chain 4. That's 1 more than we did for the double crochet. This also counts as a stitch, so get the marker in there before we go any further. Again, we're going to yarn over first, but this time we're doing it twice. one more than we did for double crochet. Insert your hook into that second stitch as usual, yarn over and pull through that first loop. You'll now have 4 loops on your hook, so yarn over and pull through 2 of them 3 times. And that, of course, was one more time than we did for double crochet. Let me do that just once more. Yarn over twice, insert hook, yarn over, pull through 1, yarn over, pull through 2, 3 times. Brownie points if you've noticed that the stitches are getting taller, but also kind of floppier the further up we go. Remember, when you get to the stitch marker in the top of the turning chain, you can just work into the top of the turning chain itself rather than the V to make your life a lot easier. Memorising stitches. So I'm sure you've spotted that instead of memorising every step, all you really need to know about these different stitches is how many yarn overs to do before inserting your hook. With a single crochet it's 0, with a double crochet it's 1, with a triple crochet it's 2. I'll give you 3 guesses how many yarn overs you do for a quadruple crochet. After inserting the hook, your first step is always to yarn over and pull through 1, and then regardless of how many loops you have on the hook, you'll just be doing yarn over, pull through 2, as many times as it takes to get back down to just 1 loop remaining on your hook, and that's when you know the stitch is complete. A note on turning chains and working the first row of a project. Before we go any further, I just want to backtrack a bit and clarify something about turning chains. You've seen that to start a row of single crochet stitches, you chain 1 and it doesn't count as a stitch. Whereas with double and triple crochet stitches, you chain 3 and 4 respectively and it does count as a stitch. So how does this affect things if you're, say, doing a row of double crochet straight into your starting chain? Again, this is going to be a little bit theoretical, but you have all the info you need to make sense of it, so just go with me here. Because the stitches we've seen have got progressively taller, the goal of the turning chain is to raise our working yarn up to the height of the stitches we'll be doing and avoid weird stretching at the edges of our work. Here's an example. I'm doing a single chain and then going straight into a triple crochet. See here how the V of my stitch is very stretched out because it needed to cover all of that extra height. As you might imagine, this leads to some real weird results with the edges of your work. Now, back in the single crochet section, I made a chain of 27 stitches, skipped the one closest to my hook, and did the first single crochet into that second chain. With what you now know, you can see that's the same thing as our single crochet turning chain of 1. So even though I did 27 chain stitches, after skipping that one, we actually ended up working 26 single crochets. Here I have another chain 27, but this time my first row will be double crochets. I know that double crochet uses a turning chain of 3 and that it counts as a stitch. So these 3 chain stitches directly behind my hook are the 3 that will form my first double crochet stitch, and I should start working into the 4th chain from my hook. After completing the row, I would end up with a total of 25 stitches. If you're following a pattern, obviously they will almost always just tell you how many chains to skip. But for me personally, I like to understand the why of what I'm doing, so there you go. Okay, so we can make a slip knot, chain, work single, double and triple crochet stitches, and I'm pretty sure if a pattern called for the fairly rare quadruple, you would be able to figure that out. But there is one very common stitch that breaks a few of these rules, so apologies in advance. It's the half double crochet. This is actually my favourite crochet stitch, and depending how you work it, you can even make it look like knitting. It's super fun, you'll love it, I'm sure. The turning chain for a half double crochet is less clear cut, Personally, I tend towards doing one chain and not counting it as a stitch, but you may also see patterns using 2 chains and counting it as a stitch. Until you know enough to have a preference, just do whatever the pattern says. So I've turned my work, chained 1, and we'll start off the same way as we did the double crochet by yarning over once before inserting the hook. Yarn over and pull through 1. So far, so familiar. But this is where we depart from the normal double crochet. You're going to yarn over and pull through all of the remaining 3 loops on your hook all at once. Just go slow. Remember what we said before about starting over if you get tangled or start to panic. You will be fine. Let's just get that stitch marker in and then we'll do it again. Yarn over, hook through, yarn over and pull through 1, yarn over and pull through all 3 remaining. And that's your second half double crochet. This gives a stitch that, as the name suggests, is sort of a halfway point between single and double crochet in terms of height. Since it has 1 less step than the double crochet, it's also significantly faster to complete. I just love it so much, and I hope you will too once you get over the initial panic. The final essential stitch is slip stitch, which is probably the simplest one, but I've left it until last due to the fact that it's not often you'd see it in a flat project like this. As we've seen, the main difference between crochet stitches is in their height, and slip stitch is the shortest of the bunch. In fact, it doesn't even have a post. That's right, everything I taught you is wrong where slip stitch is concerned. Get over it. You'll often see slip stitch used in projects like toys or granny squares to connect the end of your round back to the beginning, and it can also be used to seam 2 flat pieces together in a quick and easy, albeit somewhat bulky way. If you've been following along with this sample swatch I've made here, we're just going to add a row of slip stitches to the top to demonstrate how it's done, but you won't often actually use it this way. So, assume your usual starting position. For a slip stitch row, you'll generally chain 1 and not count it as a stitch, which is the exact same thing we did with single crochet. So, chain 1. And since that doesn't count as a stitch, we'll be stitching into this first V here. Just stick that hook straight in. Now yarn over as usual, but instead of pulling through just the first loop on your hook, you're going to pull through everything. That's it, that's literally the stitch. Again, insert hook into that next stitch, yarn over, pull through everything. And so on and so forth across the row. You might not notice right away, but this creates a much tighter row of stitches than you're used to, so bear that in mind and try and loosen your tension as much as you can. If you find that it's working up too tight, you can always use a bigger hook for this row. Because slip stitch is tighter and less stretchy, you will sometimes see it used on flat projects like, say, washcloths, where it'll ask you to do 1 row of slip stitch around the entire outside of the piece just to give it a nice neat finish. But as I say, you will usually see this used more often in 3D projects. And that is about it in terms of essential crochet stitches, so let's have a quick look at how to finish off your work. This is very simple. Basically, we're just going to cut the working yarn and then secure and hide the loose end. So, grab your scissors. It is easiest to leave yourself a decently long yarn tail. I don't know how long that is, maybe 5 inches or so. Remember, you can always cut more off later, but you can't add more, so if you leave yourself an awkwardly short yarn tail, you will be kicking yourself. Done. No going back. Okay, so if I remove the hook from this last remaining loop, if I were to pull on this yarn tail, that loop would unravel. The whole piece would start to unravel one stitch at a time in this direction, which is definitely not what we want, right? So first order of business is to secure that final loop. It's dead easy. Literally all you are going to do is pass the yarn tail through that loop. You can do it with your fingers like I do. It's easier if you pull that loop up a bit and just pass that through, or you can leave your hook in there, yarn over and pull through using the hook. Totally up to you. But as you can see, now if I pull on that yarn tail, it's completely secure. That's not going anywhere. Second order of business is what to do with this ugly yarn tail. Remember right back at the beginning of the video when I listed a tapestry needle as one of the supplies you'd need? Well, this is why. Technically, you don't need a special needle. I've hidden yarn tails by just using a smaller crochet hook at times when I was too lazy to stand up and get the right tool for the job, but they are very cheap and they make life easier, so why not? Thread your tapestry needle, your emergency bobby pin, your paper clip, whatever it is you've decided to use. And our goal now is to hide this tail inside the stitches where they'll be nice and cozy but also not visible on the outside of your work. So you can see here I'm running my needle underneath the stitches. I'm just going to go along a decent way. It's not super important for a swatch, I'm just giving you an idea. Pull the needle through. Make sure the end of your yarn tail has come out and you're not making an idiot of yourself on camera like I currently am. And then what I like to do, because this can tighten it and make the whole fabric bunch up a bit, I like to just give it a little bit of a stretch and make sure that's all nicely distributed inside the piece. You could leave it like this, but I prefer to be more secure, and the trick to that is to vary the direction of your weaving. So I'm going to go down a row, and then I'm going to weave back across in the opposite direction just to make that more secure. This isn't an exact science. You'll soon kind of get a feel for how best to weave in on any particular combination of stitches without it looking weird. You'll also find that the amount you need to weave in and the amount you want to change direction varies with the project you're doing, how much wear and tear it's going to get, how likely it is to be snagged, and also the type of yarn. Once you're done, snip off any extra yarn. Be very careful that you're not catching an actual stitch. I need new scissors. Give it all a nice stretch, again just to make sure there's no weird bunching or anything, and you are done. Now you can go do the exact same weaving technique with this yarn tail we left at the start. So where to go from here? Obviously what we've looked at today are just the essential beginner crochet skills. That said, you can make so many things with the stitches we've just learned. And of course with the underlying theory and pro tips that we've picked up today, you are now primed to learn new things much more quickly. Depending on your plans though, you might be interested in learning more advanced techniques like working in the round, decreasing stitches, changing colour. All of these things would be better suited to a more adventurous beginner tutorial. I will of course get to work planning out that video and probably a beginner-friendly pattern to go with it, but in the meantime I like to think I've given you the confidence that you can probably just Google these things and figure it out. Okay, this was a lot of info in one go, I am very aware of that. But if you're anything like me, having the whys and wherefores of a new skill really helps things to bed into your brain. It just ups your confidence in terms of tackling more complicated projects or even designing things of your own. If you did like this video, please leave it a thumbs up so that we can help more people. And of course, consider subscribing if you would like to see more crochet tutorials and quick start guides for other crafts. If you have a crochet question that wasn't covered in this video, feel free to leave a comment and I will get back to you as soon as I can. My Instagram DMs are always open, and if you want a more in-depth conversation, you can find my email address in the About tab of my channel. Let me stress this part. I love to see new people getting into this craft, so I will do whatever I possibly can to help you learn. If you're already an experienced crocheter, first, I don't know why you watched this long, but feel free to add your own tips. I'm sure in some ways you disagree with what I've shown today. Crochet is just way too freeform for there to be a consensus. Alright, you've listened to me for long enough. Go outside and enjoy it suddenly being spring. I will be back soon with some more crafty nonsense, so in the meantime, have a brilliant rest of your day and keep making cool stuff.